Good evening, Praise Chapel Fresno, and all those of you tuning in. We appreciate wherever you're tuning in at, whatever you're tuning in on. Just glad you're here this evening. Still going through the book of Revelations, tearing that apart, getting into kind of the final portion of God's judgment here, and as we're going to wrap up chapter 16. Remember, you can continue to support this ministry, this move, with your tithes, your offerings, your love gifts. You can do that either on your smartphone, on your tablet, with the Easy Tithe app, or you can go to easytithe.com, search Praise Chapel Fresno. You'll see exactly which one you can give on. Or if you go to praisechapelfresno.com and click on the give button, it's going to take you to a third-party website we're contracted with. You can give safely and securely through that. Or if you're joining us on our in-person services, we have our envelopes behind every single one of our chairs with tithes and offerings box located just outside the sanctuary. And if you're joining us on our online campus only, you can always mail in, drop off your tithes, your offerings, your love gifts. We'll get them deposited in a timely manner. If you don't know what our address is, or you'd like to donate, but you don't know what it is, just Google Praise Chapel Fresno, California. You'll see our address, and you can do it that way. So really appreciative of what God's been doing, really appreciative of what this church has been doing at this point. We're about to get into some new things that are going to be happening here, very exciting. So those of you that have been constantly saying, like, Pastor, whatever I can do, let me know. You'll know really soon exactly what we need done. So just really excited, but continue to invite people to church, continue to bring them out, text someone after this evening and just tell them, you got to come to my church. God's doing amazing things. Get people in church, get people watching us, all this kind of stuff. And that's how we're spreading the name of Jesus Christ. Is we're not really spreading it if we're saying, well, you guys have it on YouTube, so people should go watch it, and get people into the house of God. They can connect with the Spirit, feel what God is doing, see what God can do with their lives, and get them ingrained in Praise Chapel Fresno. So still continuing the book of Revelation. So we're going to start off in chapter 16. If you remember, in the start of this chapter, God's been pouring out the bowls of his wrath. So we had first the seals, the trumpets. Now we have these bowls. So this is towards the end of the tribulation that we're going through. That's a 7-year period, we're told. So let's start off in verse 12. Again, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. So some have still been saying, it doesn't quite line up with what I'm saying. It's all the same stuff. I'm just in the English Standard Version. And I think some people are having a complication. Some use the New Living Translation. And it seems like it's kind of, it's not in the exact same verbiage or syntax that I'm saying it. But just remember, I'm in the English Standard Version. So verse 12 says, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and it was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. So this verse, previously these angels have been pouring it out in specific areas, and it's been affecting the entire globe. Now, these last two bowls are this bowl right here seems somewhat focused on one specific place. So if we remember when it said the bowl pours out and there's darkness in that area, that's focused solely on where the Antichrist is basically his headquarters. This one is also going to be in a very specific area. So the Euphrates River. Now, the contents of this bowl caused the river to dry up. So prior bowls have been used to corrupt or destroy the earth's water. But this judgment is not about corrupting it's not about corrupting or removing the use of water. Rather, it seems to be about removing a barrier that's going to be used for defensive purpose, preparing the way for the invading kings from the east. So if you'd kind of when you first started following the war in Ukraine, you kind of saw this kind of work out. There was sometimes they use water barriers. It's very difficult for an army to get across a specific water barrier. As I've been paying attention to it and reading it, the Russian army's been trying to set up bridges across these, and they're just having a really hard time doing it. So we can see that what God is doing here is he's removing an obstacle from an invading army. But the Euphrates is called the Great River 5 times in Scripture. It was the eastern boundary of Israel. To some extent, the river provided protection from Israel because it was too difficult to cross, and a wilderness to the west separated it from Canaan or the Promised Land. It flows about 2,000 miles long. It's anywhere from 300 to 1,200 yards wide. So about 3 football fields to 12 football fields. So an enemy trying to cross that is going to be very easily met and fought. In the first century, when Revelations was written, the Euphrates divided the east from the west and the kingdoms of China and India and beyond into the east. So it's really a barrier, and it really kind of gave a measure of protection to Israel. So the kings from the east is a little bit different. So a lot of people speculate as to what this actually is. For some reason, these armies of the east are coming westward. So some actually believe that they think it's to wipe out Israel or to rebel against a European-based world leader or the Antichrist. So people say, well, they're coming to destroy Israel. But then there seems to be some contention against the beast at this point. So why would God remove the Euphrates River if it was just to attack Israel? So they're saying that this seems to be more focused, like it's going towards the beast. In the tribulation, the eastern invaders will cross a dry Euphrates, march through what was Babylon, and enter Palestine. Now, ultimately, they do come to do battle against God. But the thought is that they're coming against the Antichrist. And then verses 13 and 14 say, "And I saw coming out of the mouth of a dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are demonic spirits performing signs, who go abroad to kings to the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of the Almighty." So, we start bringing back kind of this unholy trinity, right? The beast, the false prophet, and the Antichrist. So the dragon, of course, being Satan in conjunction with the false prophet and the Antichrist. This is about them exerting their influence on other world leaders. So it's not so much that they're saying it's a demonic spirit that's coming out, but it's more of the influence that's going to be coming out of their mouths that's going to persuade other world leaders to fight with them. Not against them, but to fight with them. Since the dawn of human history, the devil has constantly used his influence over unbelievers. The devil rules the world, and at this point, the entire world is basically just entrenched in evil. Near the end of the tribulation, he's going to hold an unbridled sway over the Antichrist and the false prophet. So as they go through this and as they do this, there's these groups from the east that are coming, but then this appears as if what the 3 of them are going to be doing is going to be convincing the world leaders that might be coming against them, instead of fighting them, to fight Israel, to fight against God. Now the frogs, God uses frogs also in other places, but the ancient Jewish people regarded frogs as unclean and repulsive. So this is an appropriate comparison for this era, as John uses these spirits as slimy and unclean. So he's saying that what they're doing, it's just slimy, it's unclean, it's real manipulative. But at this point, he's bringing this up, and this also happened in Egypt, where God, had it rain frogs, or the frogs came from the Nile. So it's something that is also drawing way back into Exodus, which a lot of Revelations is jumping back into those books, just bringing these judgments back from God. But the Jewish people would see them as unclean. So John's not really saying that there are frogs coming out of their mouths. What he's saying, it's not a literal translation, but in his era, he would attribute an unclean spirit to a frog that just jumps around and goes all over the place. Demonic signs and wonders are used commonly by evil spirits as a form of deception. So even in a time where Moses goes into Pharaoh, like his sorcerers were able to show signs and wonders too. Now, yeah, whether people say, well, that was magic, that was this, it's still demonic possession that's coming through this, but it's going to be using signs and wonders to continue to confuse people and draw their attention back towards the Antichrist, the false prophet, and Satan. Now, the battle, in reality, it's more of a war. Referred to as using a name in particular, the location, it's talking about Armageddon. I'm going to get into that in a second. But the mission of these 3 spiritual beings is to gather the world leaders together for this conflict. So what we see is this invading army comes in, then these unclean spirits come out, and it's designed to alter the king's perspective or the world leader's perspective as to who they really should be fighting. There's no real explanation as to why the armies assemble, but again, the most plausible explanation is that these international armies are going to assemble in order to first come against the beast, but then in an all-out attempt to annihilate the Jews and to dethrone God seems to be their purpose. It's possible that they may be initially brought together in an attempt to fight the Antichrist. That is a highly likely situation when you have someone that's basically going to be over the entire earth. He's doing horrible things, and yet it's affecting the entire world. We continue to have calamity that's going through. God continues to judge the earth. then what we're seeing is a lot of world leaders might be getting upset at what's going on. I mean, we've already seen that the oceans, everything's going to die in the ocean. So we're going to be in economic failure at that point. Because of everything dead in the oceans and the oxygen that's not going to be there, we're going to be having climate shifting, climate change. So these world leaders are going to be seeing that the effects of what he's doing are causing this. But it's not going to be the first time that an army is going to come against someone that will be convinced that he is not the one doing it and that it is actually the Jewish nation that is causing this and that they need to rise up against them. Because I'm sure he'll use the Bible and say, look, their God said it was going to happen. It's not me, it's them. So that's kind of a common thought is they'll first come to fight the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet, but that through these unclean spirits, they will be able to convince these world leaders that they are not the targets, that it should be the Jewish nation, it should be God and Jesus Christ. So let's read verses 15 and 16. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go out about naked and seen exposed. And they assembled them at that place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So this verse is sometimes printed in parentheses. So if you're looking in a Bible, you're looking on your app, you may see it either in parentheses or it'll be in red lettering. So this is actually Jesus Christ who is speaking this. And he's speaking to the believers that are still there. His statement presents a challenge to the tribulation, the believers that are still in the tribulation, to stay alert. They'll be blessed if they do so, knowing that Jesus will return to earth suddenly and unexpectedly. So there's the fact that he uses the garments. This kind of is drawing back to kind of like Hebrew tradition of clothing. So in a picture of practical, it's using the garments. They're talking about a picture of practical and spiritual righteousness. An unclothed person inside their home is not prepared for an unexpected guest. They're not ready to rush out if there's any kind of emergency. So the Hebrew men of their times, they would wear tunics, they would wear robes, but typically when they're at home, they're wearing kind of a very thin garment that is not really held in specific places. So it'd be very easy for them to be seen naked. And so Jesus is reminding the people, stay alert, stay ready, because at a moment's notice, I'll return. And he's really trying to let them know that although they see this battle forming, although they see this happening in this place they call Armageddon, that he's telling them you have to remain spiritually diligent because I'm going to come back and it's going to happen suddenly, and you want to make sure that you're prepared for my coming. Armageddon, now in Hebrew, it's two different words. It's, I wrote it down, hold on, Har Megiddo. Or it's translated to the hills of Megiddo, and a lot of people will contest this and they'll say, well, that's not what it means, because there is a city of Megiddo, but they're saying it's not a hill, it's a valley. But if you start taking through what's going on with each one of these calamities, with the earth quaking, with all this, that's how mountains are born, basically, is tectonic plates colliding and creating mountain ranges. So what people are looking at today and saying, well, it's impossible for it to be there. Let's count how many times God literally shakes the earth during the tribulation. So I'm guessing there's going to be some shifting in the topography of like what we're looking at, because it even says at one point in that specific area, not one building will stand, right? In Israel, when he talks about the shaking. So this city is about 18 miles southwest of Haifa, of Haifa. And this war is going to be waged there. Now, this will only end in Christ's return. Yes, the war will be waged from the central point. And this is what I love, because when I started getting on these message boards of things and really getting into Revelations, I started realizing that people have really narrow views of what the Bible says. So they start talking about, well, this war is only going to be fought in this one specific area in Armageddon, but what's going to happen to the rest of the world? And just as we've talked, like when God shows grace, when God does this, they're saying it's like specific locations he's doing this. But in this instance, When the world wars were happening, there were specific battle sites. It didn't mean that that every location on the earth was at war with one another. It just meant that every single foreign body that was around was involved in these wars, but they were fought on really specific battle sites. So just because it talks about Armageddon being the location of this war does not mean that this will not be happening in multiple locations, or that it won't affect the entire world. Just look at what's happening today in Ukraine and with Russia. Like, it's affecting the entire world, but it doesn't mean that the entire world is at war with one another at this point. So I find it interesting that when people get these, they take it and they say, well, it's literal. It's going to happen in that one location. So as long as you are not in the city of Megiddo at this time, then you don't have to worry about anything. And it's like, then you get people that kind of, clap back at that, and they're like, are you insane? Like, this is talking about, it's affecting the globe. It's not meaning that just that one location is going to be where this war is at. It just means that's where it's centrally located. And then let's look at verses 17 and 18. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came from the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." This is God speaking from the throne. And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, pearls of thunder, and a great earthquake, such as there has never been since man was on earth. So great was that earthquake. So again, John kind of repeating this whole earthquake thing. That kind of goes back to how they just emphasize what was happening. So he says, this earthquake is going to happen. It's going to be so violent that man has never been on earth with it this violent before. And it was that bad. Like, everything's going to fall apart at this point. So the seventh bowl, unlike all the other bowls, what follows doesn't seem specifically targeted at the item it pours it into. So the angel didn't pour the bowl into the air and the air become poisonous, like what happened with the waters and what happened with the darkness. This seems to be something they're pouring it out. It's in the air. And then the angel's action might suggest the judgment is especially wide-ranging, covering the entire earth, because it's going to say it's going to shake violently. Also, there's another reference here because as we've read before and as we've taught here in the church, one of the names attributed to Satan is actually the prince of the air. So it's likely that this could be something that's affecting the entire globe and focused directly on Satan's power. It is done, that whole term that comes up, again, kind of referring back to, what Jesus Christ says on the cross. Although he uses one that says it is finished, meaning that something has ended at this point. It is done is more of this is complete. So in mercy, God has stretched out his hands as much as he possibly could. The seals were followed by trumpets. The trumpets were followed by bowls. Now there's no more judgment that's going to come upon the earth. Once this bowl is poured, God declares an end to his judgment. Once the events of this bowl, of this judgment are completed, the tribulation will have ended and the end times will move into their final stages. And we'll as we continue, we'll kind of see what that means. Global judgment. Now, with the seventh with the sixth and seventh seal, or the seventh seal, the sixth and the seventh trumpets, there are also earthquakes. But the seventh bowl is unprecedented in its magnitude. Revelation 16:18 describes it as the greatest earthquake to strike the earth in human history. What is described in this following verse, it leads interpreters to suggest that the geography of the entire world will be altered. And the next couple of verses are going to talk about this, but when you start looking at professors of geology that are also Christians, they'll write things and they'll just say, this is to a point that, what we originally had when they say we were Pangea before, an event that caused that to split apart. They're like, the Earth's, topography, the Earth's mapping, all of that will be inaccurate simply just because things are going to move around so much that it's going to be unrecognizable to people that would have known what Earth looked like before this had happened. But the event will change, will be worldwide. It will not be restricted to a specific region in Israel. Even the mountains, the coastlines, those are all going to be altered at this point. Then verses 16 and 19, then it says, the city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of wine of the fury of his wrath, and every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found. That's kind of interesting there, in a sense that they're saying even the mountains themselves will somewhat be leveled to this point in the area that John is looking at. So Jerusalem seems to be the location that's called the Great City, and it's going to experience the same magnitude that everyone else is, but it's going to be split into 3 sections. Cities worldwide will collapse into rubble. I mean, just Google like the worst earthquakes in history and look at what's standing after. There's very little standing. Even I've even watched some videos of earthquakes happening in other parts of the world, and everything just lays flat at a specific point because of how violent the shaking is. Now, whether or not the rearrangement of the islands and the mountains is global, what we do know is the event is strong enough to create havoc on every part of the earth. The great earthquakes that level the cities across the globe may coincide with the dividing of the 2 of the Mountain of Olives where Jesus returns to the earth, because it talks about that splitting. Throughout biblical history, it brings up Babylon, but again, it's not talking about a specific city or that there was a city of Babylon. It's talking more about the spirit of what Babylon entered into this earth. That's the idolatry, the sexual immorality. The overall just central idea of godlessness is where this is coming from, where it's saying those that have lived godless are going to be forced to drink the cup of God's wrath. And that, again, his wrath being just that passionate anger. So this is not going to be pretty for them on this end, because not only do you have these violent earthquakes, things are just happening during this war. As we kind of read, when Jesus reaps the earth, the angel reaps the heavens. Once we get to this point, they're saying that every ounce of what God holds against them for their godlessness is going to just be unleashed on the earth. And if you read through God's wrath in the Bible, it's pretty scary stuff. There's things he's promised he'll never do again. With the whole flooding of the earth, I'll never use flooding again. I think some people might be like, you know what, we'll take the flood. Like, we'll take the flood over the boils. We'll take the flood over the burning. And we'll take the flood over the next thing that happens. Verse 21, and great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from the heavens on the people, and they cursed God for the plague of hail because the plague was so severe. This was also used back in Egypt as well. But hail frequently is used as a tool of judgment against God's enemies. We see it in Egypt. You also see it's used in Canaanite. God uses it against Israel. And the other 2 cities are Gog. I didn't write down the other city. It's Gog, and the other one is Gog, or it's M something Gog, but it's Gog, and God uses it frequently to judge people. Now, in each of these instances, has rained down from heaven, has been a tool of judgment, not as corrective. Now, the heaviest hailstorm the United States ever has on record was found in 2010. It was in South Dakota. They weighed just under 2 pounds, and when it fell, it was so devastating and dangerous for living creatures outside. It killed animals. It could have killed people. I didn't get as far to read as if it actually did kill people, but it did kill animals that weren't kept under a shelter. It was going through homes. It was going through windows. There were several, I want to say thousands of car accidents when it happened, just because of how heavy 2 pounds actually was as it's falling from the sky down to the earth. So you can only imagine what kind of devastation 100-pound hail, what do we call it? Just hail? 100-pound piece of it falling to the earth and landing at terminal velocity. It's going to be a lot like comets kind of hitting the earth, going to cause massive devastation. But what I find so interesting is throughout all of this happening, throughout all of this judgment, those who are godless remain obstinate. They remain godless, and they refuse to acknowledge God. They refuse to, and it says they curse God for the plague is so severe. Okay, if you're already going to acknowledge that he exists and that all this is happening because of judgment, would you not think that it might be prudent to be well, you've done this already so far. I've made it this far. I want to see what's on the other side, and I really don't want to end up in another place, so I'm going to give my life to God at this point. It doesn't say that people can't be saved at this point. It just says that God has shut off access to the throne room. So we know that there are people that are there, and the fact that it says they curse his name still means that there's an opportunity for people to turn around and convert. It's so simple. Like, you're seeing everything that the Bible says. So I was kind of chatting back and forth with this pastor out. I think he's in Tennessee. Don't quote me. I was just chatting with him, and I was telling him, I said, it's interesting when it talks about these kings coming from there and how quickly people can be manipulated into thinking like, oh, you're not really standing against me. It's these people you need to. And he sent me a few articles of that happening throughout times in warfare and tribal warfare and things like that, where people were actually convinced by someone they were coming against that they were actually partners and should attack another group of people. And I thought that was pretty interesting in a sense that they weren't doing it in a malicious sense of saying, when we look at, dictators like Mussolini or Hitler or anything like that, like they had a common goal that they were fighting against. This is basically people coming against you, and you can be convinced that I'm not the real enemy here, that this is. So we can see that their influence, that that Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, they're going to have a huge sway over all the world leaders, because at their word, and I'm guaranteed, I said, I believe this guy's going to take and open the Bible and say, see, it's them doing it, not me, it's them. And we need to go against them. And he was chiming back, he's like, I never thought of that. But the enemy does quite frequently use the Bible against us, like makes us feel like we're less than we should be, and reminds us of scriptures and things that we're not keeping holy. And like we started chatting about that. I thought it was pretty interesting. So I want to say it was like, I forget your name, but if you're watching, thank you for your chat back and forth. And if you want, you can continue to support our church, our ministry, which anyone in our church can do, anyone not in our church can do. You can do so via your tithes, your offerings, your love gifts. You can do that on your smartphone, your tablet, via Easy Tithes smartphone app. You can find that in your Google Play or your App Store. You can also go to easytide.com and find Praise Chapel Fresno there. You can also go to praisechapelfresno.com, click Give on the toolbar. It's going to take you to a third-party website that you can give safely and securely on. Or if you're joining us on our in-person services, we have our tithes and offering envelopes on the back of every chair with a tithe and offering box located just outside the sanctuary. And if you're joining us on our online campus only, we invite you, you can give. You can Google Praise Chapel Fresno, California. You'll see our address. We appreciate anything and all that the people of God are giving to this church, and all that you've been sowing into it. And we're definitely seeing the benefits, the fruits of what God is doing through his people's dedication of just giving, not just of your money, of your prayers, of your time, your willingness to serve. That's all going to come to fruition here. Got a lot of exciting things that we want to put together and get out to our leadership so we can get running on some new things that we want to do here at Praise Chapel Fresno. But we love you guys. We'll see you either in person or online Sunday morning, 10 a.m.